I am Diane Chamberlain, and I'm the author of 21 novels. And thank you so much, Book Trip, for making this live chat possible. I'm really delighted to see people over here on the chat roll. When you see me looking to the left, it just means I'm checking out your questions and seeing what it is that you're interested in. Um, Let me tell you just a little bit about The Good Father, in case you haven't read it. It's the story of a young guy who is raising his 4-year-old daughter on his own. His name is Travis, and her name is Bella. And um, he is a construction worker, and it's really a tough economy. And one day, his house burns down, along with taking his mother's life, and he loses his job. And he and Bella have to move into his van. So he can't find work, and he ends up turning to desperate measures to be able to provide for his young daughter. And that's just a little bit of the story. Hi, everybody. I'm seeing people checking in here. I'm glad that you loved it, Jo Marie. Thank you so much. Bonnie Yee is asking, where did the idea for the story come from? Every morning I work at Starbucks. I take my writing to Starbucks, and one morning I was sitting there and this guy came in with a little girl, and I began to, I have an imagination that is overworked, and I began to wonder if he was really her father or if he kidnapped her or what the story was there. And I started thinking, what if he asked me to keep an eye on her while he goes out to his car for something and he never comes back? And that's how the story started. And actually, when I began writing the book, I thought it would be mostly from the point of view of the woman in the story, in the Starbucks, who is left with the little girl and has to figure out what to do. But as I began to write the book, Travis began to become much more of the central character. And so Erin, the woman in the coffee shop, has a very big role to play, but it's really Travis's story. Yes, Bonnie's mentioning that it's rare to have a book like this with a guy as the main character, and it really is. I was kind of worried. I usually have a male point of view in my stories, but not as the central point of view. So I really was a little bit concerned about how I would pull that off. But to be honest, Travis almost wrote himself. He really came to me pretty easily, and I had my significant other, John, read it for me, and there were a few places where he told me that Travis sounded like a girl, so I fixed that up. But I think he's a pretty good guy. I really enjoyed getting to know him. I hope you guys do too. Somebody can't hear me. I hope that Book Trip can straighten that out. Lit Girl is asking if I have a writing routine or a special place where I go to be inspired. Well, obviously, Starbucks. um, I have different writing routines at different times, and depending on what part of the process I'm in. So a lot of times when I'm just beginning to plan the book, I always go to the coffee shop in the morning, but I'll sit there and I'll play with ideas, or I'll read news on the internet, or I'll read the newspaper, or I'll pay attention to conversations around me. I just open my mind up and become kind of a sponge for everything that's going on around me and what could possibly turn into a story. And then I began to write down scenes on index cards. If you scroll back on my blog at my website, which is dianechamberlain.com, you'll see what I do with my index cards. I write down scenes, many, many, many scenes, and then I put them on a great big grid that I've created that breaks the book down into acts. And when I do it that way, I've always had to do it this way. Even as a teenager, when I was in high school writing an essay paper, this is how I did it. So I guess I haven't progressed very much since then. But I will move the cards around until they're in an outline that I like. And then I'll usually start to write. And as I write, the characters will tell me that I was all wrong in my outline and that I need to rework the outline. And so I'll rework it probably 3 times during the course of a book. As I get down to the real nitty-gritty of writing that first draft, I write pretty much all day long. And I write in 1-hour spurts where I try not to check the internet or be interrupted. And I find that that has really helped me. Before I disciplined myself to do that, I would just get too sidetracked by email and all the cool stuff on Facebook. And so I really do try to discipline myself. And then at the closer I get to deadline, which is where I'm at now, I'm 2 months from deadline, I work even in the evenings. And of course I work on weekends, and I'm just constantly at it because the panic is setting in. I'm going to check your questions here. A Word with Kate wants to know how I continue to find inspiration after 20 plus novels. And the truth is sometimes it's challenging, but most of the time it's really not. And it's because I do tend to keep my imagination open to what's going on around me. I watch a lot of movies. I pay attention to story, and then I think about how others have created stories and how I can shape ideas that are coming into my mind. And it's, I've thought about could I ever retire? And yeah, I think I could retire. And what I would do after I retire is write more stories, because I can't think of anything else that I really want to do. So this is both, it started out as a hobby for me, and it became my passion and my obsession. And then it became a really satisfying and lucrative career. So I've been very lucky that way. And hopefully I'll continue to find inspiration. I'll tell you while we're waiting for more questions, I'll tell you one of the funny things that happened as I was researching The Good Father. I always do a lot of research into my books. And there's a character named Robin. And in the beginning, you don't understand really why Robin is even in the story. But after a while, you begin to realize, and I'm not giving anything away, that she is Bella's mother. And you wonder why it is that she has never had custody of Bella, that Travis has always had custody of her. So Robin is a very significant character, and she lives in a little town in North Carolina called Beaufort. And I picked Beaufort mostly because I wanted to visit Beaufort. I like to go to the towns where my books are set. So I made reservations at a bed and breakfast in Beaufort, and I went and checked in there. And Robin is the manager of a bed and breakfast, so it was perfect for me to stay in a B&B, and I got to pick the manager's brain about what was going on, what his life was like, and what his responsibilities were like, and that sort of thing. So when I'm someplace where my character lives, I sort of pretend that either I am that character or I'm walking around with that character. So in Beaufort, I started walking around the town with her, with Robin. And Beaufort has a beautiful little waterfront with boats, and I walked along the waterfront with Robin, and we walked in the stores, and there's a wonderful atmospheric graveyard, and we walked into the graveyard, and um, Robin was sort of in her role as bed and breakfast manager, and she was explaining to me about the different people who were buried in the graveyard, which is something that appears in the story as well. And that night, I went to dinner in this cute little restaurant, and I thought, this restaurant is so adorable. This is where Robin and her fiance could come for a special dinner. So I was still thinking about Robin, and the waitress came up to me and she said, "Hi, I'll be your waitress tonight. My name is Robin." And I freaked out. And the waitress did not understand why I was so freaked, and it was really hard to explain to her, "Well, I'm a novelist," and I think she thought I was out of my mind. But but that's my story about researching Robin's town where she lives. I'm going to check your questions here. Somebody wants to know which part was the least enjoyable to write about the Good Father. Let me think about that. I think, first drafts are terrible, literally terrible. I'm almost at the end of a first draft right now of my next book, and it's terrible. I don't know how writers who just sit down and write their book from start to finish and it's perfect. I don't know how they do it. Mine is just a mess. And I do not stop to polish as I write. I need to get the whole story down, or else I think it's a fear of mine that I won't get the whole story down if I don't just do it from start to finish and not worry about how beautiful it is and how polished the words are. And also, in my experience, because my books always have so many little twists and turns in them, and because I never know what my characters are going to come up with, I've learned not to bother polishing as I go, because the characters are only going to change things around, and then I'll have to go back and rewrite what I've worked so hard to polish. So for that reason, I just write a really, really messy first draft all the way through. But it's really hard. It's really hard for me. Even though I've outlined, I still feel uncertain of where I'm going. And as I mentioned, the characters keep changing everything on me. So I really struggle through that first draft. And I still have a few more chapters in the first draft of this next book. And so that was definitely the hardest part for me of writing The Good Father, was getting through that first draft. Once I have the first draft, then I can work on revising it and fixing it up, and it makes it, that part I really enjoy. It's much easier. I'm checking questions. Somebody is asking where I get the ideas for my characters. Do I make them up entirely, or are they inspired by real people? Well, no, they're not inspired by real people. With my very first novel, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was writing about, at that time, I was a medical social worker in a hospital. So I wrote about a character, and her name was Kit, and I made her a medical social worker in a hospital. And she was my height, and she had my hair color, and she pretty much had my personality. And I soon discovered that I couldn't make her do anything that I wouldn't do. And so I learned from that basing a character on somebody real, myself or somebody else that I knew, was very limiting. Plus, I didn't want to be sued. So I don't have any problem making people up. I really enjoy making people up. My background in psychology is very strong, and so it's easy for me to come up with characters that I think are pretty, I think they feel pretty real. They all have issues, just the way we all have issues. And I like characters that are neither all good or all bad, but somewhere in the middle. There are some pretty bad characters. Well, there's one really bad character in The Good Father, who's probably a sociopath. But everybody else in that book really has some rough edges to them and some really smooth edges. And that's the way I like my characters. Bookworm wants to know what books are on my nightstand. Oh, you don't really want to know. Right now, because I am so deep into writing my next book, which will come out in 2013 and which doesn't have a title yet, it's a very, very research-heavy book. So on my nightstand are tons of books that have to do with tobacco farming in 1960 and that sort of thing. So I have been deeply into research and not doing much fiction writing. Fiction reading, plenty of fiction writing. But to give a more general answer to that question, books that I've recently enjoyed, probably the book that I have most recently enjoyed was Stephen King's 11/22/63, which is not horror. Stephen King, to me, is at his best when he's not writing horror. Like if you think about the movie Shawshank Redemption, that's a Stephen King story, and it's a fabulous story. And it's not horror. And it's not make-believe. I don't really enjoy reading things that are not realistic. And having said that, though, 11/22/63 is about a time traveler, but I guess that I kind of think we can time travel, or I guess I hope someday we'll figure out how to time travel. So it's about a time traveler who goes back in time to try to stop the assassination of John Kennedy. And I just found it fascinating and couldn't put it down. I highly recommend it. I think it's also one of those books that crosses over gender in terms of both men and women would enjoy it. I'm going to check out your questions here. Hello, Irish Dreamer. I love hearing from somebody in Ireland. This is so cool. Just wondering where you got your inspiration for Breaking the Silence. It's one of my favorites. I couldn't put it down. Breaking the Silence is one of my older books. It's not too old. It's somewhere in the middle of the books that I wrote. And it's been reissued in both the United States, both North America, and the United Kingdom and Australia. And it's really had a resurgence in popularity, for which I'm very glad, because I'd say it's one of my favorite of my books. And it's about the CIA mind control experiments that happened in the United States, actually in Canada, to be totally honest, but at the United States bidding, during the 1950s. They were mind control experiments that were designed to figure out if we could perform mind control on our enemies. And psychiatric patients were used as the guinea pigs. And this really, truly did happen. And one day, somebody asked where I get my ideas. Well, one of my favorite ways to get ideas is to walk through the aisles of the library and look at the book spines and see what pops out at me. So one day I did that, and what popped out at me was a book that was called something like The CIA Mind Control Experiments. And at that time, the man I was married to worked for the CIA. So I was curious, and I picked it up and sat down with it, and I think I read that entire book just sitting there in the library. And I was absolutely flabbergasted that this happened. And I thought, I have got to use this in a story. And what I really wanted to do, I wanted to write from the point of view of one of the medical people who worked in a psychiatric institution and who performed these experiments. I wanted to know why they would do something like that, how they could bring themselves to be part of something like that. And so I created the character of Sarah, who, when we meet her, is quite elderly and has dementia. But we go back in time and see her as a nurse in a psychiatric institute, and we discover why it is that she does what she does. And ultimately, we also see what happens from the point of view of the patients. But it's also a love story in a couple of different ways. And it's also the story of a little girl who witnesses her father's suicide and then becomes mute and can't give the answers as to what happened to her father. So there's a lot of pieces to that book, and I'm really happy that it's getting a new chance at life and that people are enjoying it. Jo Marie says, this is about the good father, I found the relationship between Aaron and Bella to be very intense. How did you make it so realistic? For those of you who haven't read The Good Father, let me just tell you, Aaron is the woman who's in the coffee shop with whom Travis, in his desperation, leaves Bella, meaning to leave her just overnight. And this happens in the very first chapter, so I'm not giving very much away here. And Bella is 4 years old. Aaron, the reason Aaron's in that coffee shop is because a few months ago she lost her own daughter in a freakish accident. And the daughter was about Bella's age. And Aaron and her husband are grieving for that little girl in very different ways, which is typical of what happens between men and women. And Erin's been so distressed with her husband not grieving the way she thinks he should grieve that she's actually moved out of the house. And she spends her days in this coffee shop on her iPad where she's communicating with an online support group of parents who have lost children. So that's what she's doing on the day that Travis comes in with Bella. So Erin is both drawn to Bella and terrified of Bella. She's drawn to her because she misses a little girl so desperately. But she's terrified too because she knows she's not in very good shape psychologically, and she's worried that her what's the right word? Her attraction to this little girl is pathological. So having this little girl dumped in her lap is just about the most horrible and the most wonderful thing that could happen to her. As far as how did I make that relationship realistic, I'm so happy that you feel that it was realistic. That's very important to me. And what I did was, I never had little kids myself. I have 3 incredible stepdaughters, but they were teenagers when I came into their lives. However, they have now done me the favor in many ways of giving me grandkids. So 2 of them were 4 years old at the time that I wrote this book. And I spent a lot of time with them and asked them a lot of questions. The little boy said, "Are we done yet?" when I would ask him questions, but the little girl just loved it. And I learned a lot hanging around them. So they really helped me, and I think I understood Erin very well, and I think knowing both those sides of the equation really helped me put them together in a way that I am glad to hear felt realistic. I'm checking your questions. Do I have a favorite character or a least favorite character, and has any of my characters stayed with me? I definitely have a favorite all-time character, and I also have a favorite character in this book. My favorite character in this book is Bella, and that has to do with the fact that after spending time with my grandkids, she just wrote herself. She was the most fun to write because of her innocence. The things that would pop out of her mouth just amazed me, and she was just so cute. She was really fun to write. But my all-time favorite character goes way back to my third novel, Secret Lives. This is not The Secret Life of Cece Wilkes, although I do love Cece with all my heart. But Secret Lives was the story of a woman named Kate. She was a children's author, and she was agoraphobic. And she lived pretty much in a cave, which is where she had her typewriter set up, and she would write her children's books in there. And she became afraid of everything and afraid of leaving her cave. And she is dead when the story opens. And her part of the story, which has to do with a lot of other people as well, but her part of the story is written in journal form. So we learn about her that way. And I discovered that writing somebody's point of view through a journal really made me feel so close to her. I've never felt so close to a character. And it made me really love her. And I have a history of agoraphobia as well. Again, that's something, if you search back in my blog, you can find it. For those of you who have touches of agoraphobia, you might find some comfort there. But I never intended her to be agoraphobic when I started writing her, but her world began to shrink and shrink and shrink, and I realized that I just needed to go with it, that she was going to have that little part of my old personality in her. And so I became so close to her. When it came time to kill her, which everybody knows from the start of the book that she's dead, so I'm not giving anything away, but I started thinking, I can't do this to her. Is there some way that I can change the story so that she's still alive? But I knew that I couldn't do that. And it was really painful to me to have to kill her. So anyhow, that's a long answer to the question of, do I have a favorite character? It's definitely Kate in Secret Lives. As far as a least favorite goes, nothing jumps out at me. If I think of it as I continue to talk, I'll let you know. Even my really bad characters, like Roy in The Good Father, and the horrible doctor in Breaking the Silence, even those characters they're meaty, and I'm a pretty nice person, and sometimes it's really fun to just write mean, awful, bad stuff. So I can't say that I disliked those characters. I'm going to pop over here and see what your questions are. Bookworm asks, on average, how long does it take for me to finish a book? It takes me about a year. The Good Father and a few books before that, I had less time to write them. My deadlines were closer together. But I really feel that to do a book justice, I need a year. And it takes me a long time to think through my story. And then as my characters start messing around with my story, it takes me a long time to fix what I already wrote. And I revise a lot. So I'm comfortable with a year. And, my first book came out in 1989, and The Good Father's coming out, and it just came out in 2012. So I had a little a few breaks in there, but mostly every year I've had a book out. Bonnie asks, did I always envision being an author? When I was 12, I wrote a couple of awful novels. I mean, they were really bad. When I was 12, what I really loved doing was coming up with character names. So the books are full of character names, just crazy names, and not much story. So I was a huge reader as a kid, and I really enjoyed playing with stories. But when it came time, as I entered my teens and I realized that at some point I was going to need to make a living, I started thinking about what I could do, and a writer never entered my mind because I didn't think it was possible to make a living as a writer. So first I became a special education major, and I, because of that agoraphobia I mentioned, I had a really hard time in college the first few years, and I dropped out. And I took a couple of years off, and when I went back as a much more together, stronger, more committed student, I became a social work student. And I got my bachelor's, and then I got my master's. And I just loved being a social worker. I particularly loved working in hospitals, which ironically was something I had a phobia about and had to work through that too. But after I started working in hospitals, I just loved it. And that's why you'll often find hospitals and medical themes in many of my stories. So, to get back to the question of did I always envision myself being a writer, one day while I was working in hospital, I had a doctor's appointment, and that doctor kept me waiting and waiting and waiting, and I went through all the magazines in his office, and I finally picked up a pad and pen and started writing a story that I'd been thinking about since I was a kid, really. It was a story about a whole bunch of people living together on the Jersey Shore, and this is not a joke, it's truly the truth, that when I fantasized about that as a kid, I imagined that it was me and my friends and Paul McCartney and Mick Jagger and James Brown and a few other people. But as an adult, the story changed into just a group of fictional people. And I became truly obsessed with writing. First I saw it as a hobby, and then I took a class in writing the novel, and the first night of that class, the professor came in and he said, I assume that you all are hoping to be published. And it completely changed the way I viewed what I was doing. And I started thinking about becoming published. And also I was getting extremely good feedback about what I was writing in that class, and my confidence started going up. And the rest is history. It took me a long time to write that first book. I started working on it in 81. It was sold in 86, and it wasn't published until 89. It was a very long wait for that first book. Checking your questions. Savvy Bookworm wants to know if, when I get stuck in my writing, how do I find my inspiration again? Well, I do get stuck. I get stuck a whole lot. And I don't know too many writers who don't get stuck. So there are a few tricks, because I have got to get that book written. When you are just starting to write and you don't have a contract, it's really easy to sit around and wait for the muse. But when you are under contract and you have a deadline, you have got to produce. And, in some ways, it is just like any other job. You have got to do it. So I always feel a little panicky when I get stuck, but I know that there are ways for me to get myself out of it. And my favorite way is to contact my writing friends and to say, can we meet for lunch? And I need help brainstorming. And I'm extremely lucky to belong to a network of writers here in North Carolina where I can just call them up and say, can we meet for lunch? And we also get together twice a year for week-long retreats where we help each other with whatever problems we're having in our works in progress. We're all published authors, we're all under contract, we all know how hard it is and how difficult it can be when we get stuck. And so it's really an amazing group because I don't feel that it's competitive. I feel that we are all there for each other. So that's what I do is I turn to my friends, and sometimes I even turn to my Facebook friends. For example, the coffee shop that I spoke about where Travis meets Aaron in The Good Father, I couldn't come up with a name for it. The coffee shop where I was inspired about the book was Starbucks, but of course I didn't want to say Starbucks. So I asked my Facebook friends if they could come up with a good name for a coffee shop, and that I would send a copy of the book to whoever came up with the best, in my opinion, title, best name for a coffee shop. So the coffee shop is called Jumpstart, and that was named by one of my Facebook friends, whom I've never met, but she now has a copy of The Good Father. Margie wants to know, when did I first realize my interest in writing? And again, that goes back to all those books that I read as a kid. My father was a school principal, and he was big on reading. And so pretty much every day he would come home with candy bars, which wasn't so good, and books. And I just remember having tons of those little golden books. The first one that I read all by myself was The Little Red Hen. And I remember how proud I felt to read that by myself. There's just nothing better we can do for our kids than to read to them. It makes all the difference in the world, I believe. So I think that I had that reading bug in my mind just from the start. And somewhere, when I was really young, somewhere I began narrating my life in my head. I've heard of other people, especially other writers, who did this. I would get up in the morning and I would think to myself, Diane yawned and stretched and got out of bed reluctantly, and she walked to the bathroom and was taken aback when she saw her hair sticking up straight in the mirror. But she smoothed it down again and picked up her toothbrush and spread toothpaste on it and began to brush her teeth. And yeah, I did that. And if any of you do that, you probably are writers in the making. I guess I just have always been a storyteller, and eventually figured out that my life was pretty boring and not worth narrating, and that I needed to come up with some characters to talk about, and that's what I did. Consuelo's telling me that she loves my books, and I appreciate that so much. Margie says, your book, Midwife's Confession, I'm sorry, but hang on a second, something funny is happening here. I hope I'm still live. Let me know if we've got a problem. Maria says, your book, Midwife's Confession, started our mom's book club on Nantucket. Thank you. Was that the real story? It definitely felt like that. Maria, Oh, there we go. My picture is back. No, that was not a true story, not in any way, shape, or form, but I'm really glad that your book club enjoyed it. And for those of you who are in book clubs but don't know this, I speak to book clubs by speakerphone. I haven't yet moved to speaking to book clubs by Skype because I really like being able to do it in my jammies. But there's a sign-up form on my website, and I would be very happy if our schedules work out together and you'd like me to visit your book club by speakerphone when you're discussing one of my books. I'd be thrilled to do that. Maria also says that The Good Father is your next book for the 6th of June. Fantastic. I am really happy to hear that. I hope you all enjoy it. Let's see, Cam says, how would I describe the process of writing male characters? I talked about that a little bit earlier, maybe before Cam came on, but I just tried to put myself in their perspective. And as I mentioned, I also have John, my significant other, read what I've written from a male point of view, and he'll usually tell me if I've gone too femme on my guys, and I straighten them out. But there was one book, I'm trying to think which one it was, that I reissued myself. It's one of my backlist books that I've put out myself as an ebook, and gosh, I can't think of which one it was, where John read it for me, and he said, that the guy just was too soft. And I reread it, and I thought I agreed with him, and so I toughened him up a little bit. I really like nice men, and sometimes I think I go overboard in the niceness of my male characters. So I do try to get John's perspective and make my guys feel more like real guys. Irish Dreamer says, can I see myself coming to Ireland to do a book signing tour? Oh, I can really see that. I am hoping my publisher, I'll have a new publisher in 2013, and I am hoping that sometime in the next few years I make it to England and Ireland. I have so many readers there, and I am so grateful to you guys, because you really have changed my career. Becoming a popular best-selling novelist in the United Kingdom and Ireland has really made a difference for me, and it has been so amazing. It's made the world feel so small to me to be able to connect with all of you. I have really loved it, and I cannot wait to come over and meet you. So I hope one of these days that's going to happen. Thanks for that invitation. Bookworm wants to know, once I became obsessed with writing, how did I fit it in with my job as a social worker? Well, in the beginning, that was a little bit of a challenge. I was working full-time, and so I would write in the evenings, and I would write in the morning, and I would write on the weekends, just like most people who have to work full-time and fit something else in. And then my job changed so that I was able to work 4 days a week, 40 hours, 4 days a week, and have Fridays off, so I could have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to write. And then this was in Southern California, and then I moved to the Washington, D.C. area, and I was able to work part-time. So I worked half-time, again, as a medical social worker, and then I wrote the rest of the time. And eventually, I became a psychotherapist in private practice, and so I could arrange my hours so that I had a very long stretch each day of writing time. And that worked fantastically well for a while. But I hit a point um, around my fourth or fifth book where I just realized I do not have time to do both of these occupations anymore, and I'm going to have to choose. And it had been such a fight to become a published author that I knew that that's what was going to win out. And so I terminated my private practice, which was it was hard for me because I worked with teenagers. I loved working with teenagers. And it was painful, really. Um, and this is probably why you find so many teenagers and young people in my stories, because I have to have them in my life in some way, and that's the way that I've chosen. So that's a long answer to your question, but I just feel so fortunate that I've had two careers that have been incredibly rewarding. Carrie asks, do I ever do book tours? I've just started reading your books, and I love them. I live in Indiana. Um, each year when my new book comes out, I do tour in North Carolina, usually in the area where the book is set. And that's all I've done so far. I have a feeling in 2013, when the book that I'm working on now comes out, I'll be touring much more extensively. I'm not sure how far from North Carolina I'll be straying, but I definitely expect that I'll be touring more than I am now. I do a lot more connecting with people online than I do in person. I think it's much more, it's a better use of my time, but there is nothing like getting to speak in front of a live audience, and I enjoy doing that so much. So hopefully I'll get to meet you in Indiana one of these days. Bonnie, would Diane like to see The Good Father as a motion picture, and who would she cast in the roles? Oh, I would love to see it as a motion picture. There are several of my books that I'm biased, of course, but I think they would make great movies. And some of them have come close. I know that there's been talk at Lifetime about one of my books, but so far I haven't been that lucky, and I hope that it'll happen one of these days. Um, I don't know about casting. I have thought about that and thought about that, and it's a really fun topic for discussion on Facebook. So I think I'll save that, and I'll ask my Facebook readers who they'd like to see in the roles of the Good Father, because it's a really good question. Jo Marie asks, did the book with the Jersey Shore as the background get published? If so, what is the name of it? She lives in New Jersey and she would love to read it. I actually have two New Jersey books, and they're both set at the Jersey Shore. But I think the one that you're talking about is The Bay at Midnight. And The Bay at Midnight is definitely still published. And it might be a little hard to find. Your bookstore might have to order it for you. I imagine you can find it online. And it's one of my favorites. And I think the reason that it's one of my favorites is that it is set in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, in an area called Bay Head Shores, which is where my family had a summer house when I was a kid growing up. And my family sold it for $10,000 when I was 18, which is very painful to me. It was on the Intercoastal Waterway and was a cute little bungalow. And I always wanted to get it back. But it's on the Intercoastal Waterway, and it's a cute little bungalow, and it's no longer worth $10,000. So I realized there was no way I would ever get it back, and the only way that I could have it again would be to write about it. So I had so much fun setting a story in my old house. And that's the only thing about that book that's autobiographical. Terrible things happened to the family in that story, and nothing like that ever happened to my family, fortunately. but it was a fun book for me to write. And then my very first novel, Private Relations, was also set in that area of the Jersey Shore, in Point Pleasant, Mantoloking area. And, um, I could self-publish that book to make it available again, but I'm very reluctant to publish my first two novels again because to me they were my training books. They are not like my current novels. They don't have the same kinds of twists and turns, and they just don't have the assuredness, I think, of the writing. I love them. I love them dearly because I poured my heart and soul into them, but I'm reluctant to make them available again. So I think they're going to have to remain uh, collector's items on eBay. What advice would I give young writers? Well, I always give the same advice, which is um, go into a different profession. And I'm not saying that because of how hard it is to get published. I'm saying that because you need to have life experience to have something to write about. You can be a writer no matter what other work you do. And I'm living proof of that. Having been a therapist, that didn't get in the way of me also being a writer. And it gave me a real understanding of people, and that has helped me in my writing. So I really think any kind of occupation you can go into where you're dealing with people or you're dealing with the public will really help give you the kind of experience you need to be able to write. And also, learn how to write. If you are a terrible writer, take a class in the basics of writing, not just writing fiction, but learn how to string a sentence together, learn how to punctuate a sentence. It's really frustrating to me sometimes to know that somebody wants to write and has a fantastic story to tell, but just doesn't know how to write a good paragraph. So, A, learn how to write, and B, go into the kind of work that will feed that creative well. Denise says that she's read all of my books except the most recent and has found them to be really true to the spirit of friendships and family. That's a nice sentence. Would I say that my audience is middle-aged female? You know, the thing that consistently surprises me is how my books seem to reach varied age groups. I hear literally from 12-year-olds, and that blows my mind. Where are these kids' mothers? 12-year-olds to 90-year-olds and beyond. And boy, does that warm my heart. I love hearing from, let's say, a 15-year-old who tells me that her mother reads my books, her grandmother reads my books, and her great-grandmother reads my books. And they all seem to enjoy them equally. To me, I don't know, that might be the biggest compliment that I can be paid as a writer. Bookworm wants to know if I ever write nonfiction as a writing exercise, or do I journal? I am a terrible nonfiction writer. Everything that I try to write turns into a story, and I lie. I can't write nonfiction. I tried when I was younger to write magazine articles. I can't do it. So everybody has to know her weakness, and that is mine. I don't journal. I highly recommend journaling. I tried it, and I discovered that I have to write so many pages a day, and writing journal pages just chipped into that writing time. for me, but I'm very sad that I don't have journals, that I can't look back at my life. And I do hope to someday write a memoir. And I think I have some interesting things to say, but wow, a journal would make it so much easier. So please do write journals, keep journals to pass on to your kids and your grandkids. It's a great thing to do. Lit Girl asks if I have a favorite of my books. My favorite is always my current book. That just always seems to be the case. It's the book that I feel most invested in and most excited about. So right now, The Good Father, I would say, is my favorite book. But other favorites, for various reasons, The Secret Life of C.C. Wilkes is definitely a favorite. And I just noticed that Book Trib is about to announce the winners of a copy of The Good Father. So I think I'll get to say who they are in just a second. The winners are Joe Marie, Bonnie Yee, Mike Maley. Hi Mike, nice to have a guy here. Olivia 17, Savvy Bookworm, Margie Tequila, Maria Tepser, Consuelo Carpenter, Denise Crawford, and Carrie 66. If you're one of the lucky winners, please email livechat@booktrib.com with your mailing address to claim your prize, and congratulations. If you weren't one of the winners, you can purchase your own copy of The Good Father at Amazon or at your favorite bookstore or just about any place else. It's everywhere right now. I'm reading your final comments here. Denise says she's read a lot of books lately that weren't very good, and she's looking forward to reading The Good Father to cleanse her palate. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This has been really fun. I've had such a great time talking with all of you, and thank you again, Book Trib, for making this possible.